downtown stadium and convention center renovation special meeting. Today is Thursday, September the 13th. It is about 10 after 9 in the morning. We are in room 1010. I am Chairwoman, Councilwoman Jan Perry. I'm joined by Mr. Reyes. And Mr. Clerk, I think we have more than this item on the agenda. So why don't we take the shorter item first? We'll go with item number 1 first.
Morning, John White, City Clerk. Item 1 is Bureau of Engineering report relative to a vacation of Pico Boulevard and the LA Live Way Vacation District in connection with the modernization of the Los Angeles Convention Center and the construction of a new multi-purpose event center.
Would you ask staff, what staff is here to come and give the report on that?
Good morning, Edmund Yu from Public Works Bureau of Engineering. In front of you today is the application for the vacation of several streets in this area in conjunction with the proposed Convention Center and Event Center project. There are actually 12 sub-areas that is being vacated under this application. The majority of them are in the airspace. For example, like the airspace over Pico Boulevard, certain airspace over LA Live Way, and mainly they are to provide the connection and provide the construction of the new Convention Center Hall. Engineering has been working closely with our planning department on the proposed specific plan for this area, and we determined that this application is consistent with what the proposed specific plan is planning to do, so we are recommending the committee and the city council to approve the vacation.
Okay. I do have 3 cards here. I don't know whether they want to speak, but they are from Rick Davis, Carol Burrell, and Amy Freilich. And what about the other 2, Rick Davis and Carol? Do you want to speak?
Good.
You can all come up at the same time.
They are actually here with the applicant as well, and put in the cards in case
So they
of
don't.
questions.
Okay.
So I'm Amy Freilich. I'm here on behalf of the applicant. I just want to say that we are in support of all of the conditions that have been put forward here, and if you have any questions, please feel free to ask me.
Okay, I just have one quick question, but it's probably better for the staff.
Okay.
And this just quickly, just tell us how the public, the pedestrian, the cyclist, a car driver, a transit rider would be affected by this vacation.
Mainly the vacations are happening in the airspace above the street level, so really there shouldn't be any major impact to the pedestrian. Actually, that will be an improvement for the circulation in this area because a lot of the foot traffic will be away from the surface level, and there will be bridges connecting different phases, different parts of the project. So I really don't think there will be any major impact from the vacation.
Okay. Mr. Reyes, you might have a question.
No question. This is just basically aligned with the same concept that this committee has discussed and reviewed when presentations are made before this body, correct?
That's right.
All right, thank you.
Okay. Well, we'll recommend, we don't have a majority of the members present, so we'll forward this as a communication. Mr. Clerk?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, we don't have a quorum yet of the committee.
You can still act with the communication that
Yeah.
will go to council as a report would.
Yeah, okay, great. Thank you. All right, we will go on now to item number 2.
I'm sorry, Committee Chair, did you and Mr. Reyes act to approve the city engineer report?
Yes.
Thank you. Item 2, CLA, CAO, and LA Convention Center joint report relative to transaction documents and new hall design for the modernization of the LA Convention Center and the construction of a new multi-purpose event center.
And before they get started, I just wanted to ask Mr. Pettit, did you want to come up and speak now so you can listen, or do you want to wait?
I'd rather wait.
Okay, great. All right. Let's get started with the presentation then. Thank you.
Good morning, Jerry Miller, Chief Legislative Analyst. I thought what I would do is give you an overview of what's before you today. Mr. Santana is then going to get into a bit more of a detailed discussion of the financing plan and some of the things that have changed. But in terms of what's before you today what you have are the transaction documents. This is not the development agreement yet. This is not the entitlements. This is not the community benefits package. As we speak, those are in the Planning Commission meeting downstairs. The expectation is that those will be before you at your next meeting, I believe, on the 24th. When we're through today, our recommendation is to hear this item, have your questions addressed and answered, and then hold this item so that you can send it all forward when you've had a chance to look at the actions of the Planning Commission and send forward the entitlement documents.
So, Jerry, let me just interrupt you for a second, just so I can set the stage, because it's a little confusing. I've gotten some calls this morning that City Planning Commission is going on at the same time. Just so people understand what we, or the public understands what we go through today. And as the staff goes through their presentation today, I just want to make sure the public is aware that a vote on the transaction documents will not take place today here in our ad hoc committee on downtown stadium and convention center renovation. So the committee will hold this item in this committee until we have vetted and acted on the environmental impact report and the entitlement actions which the Planning Commission is deliberating right now. So just so that, because some people seem to be confused, and that I'm reflecting back on the fact that we asked the staff, the CAO, the CLA, and the Convention Center staff some time ago, it's well over a year ago now, the list of 12 principles to guide the negotiations with the developer. So I hope that sets the stage for what we are discussing today, and that we will not take a vote on this today.
Okay, exactly right. And I do want to tell you, the release of a 1,000-page report is somewhat daunting, but to be clear, what's before you today is not new. What's before you today is documenting the transaction and the issues that you've been discussing really for a year and a half now. In February of 2011, this committee established the negotiating principles that we then went forth and used to develop the Memorandum of Understanding, which you approved in August of last year. So it's taken us a little over a year after the MOU to actually put the documents together that implement that MOU. So the report addresses some of the major issues, but it's important to stress that the deal structure has remained largely the same. In some ways, financially, which Miguel will get into, is it improved for the city. The bottom line is that there is not one penny of public money in the event center in this transaction. In no way, shape, or form. There's no tax money. There's no break on the land. There is no public subsidy of any sort in the event center.
Okay, and then clarify one other point for the public. When the city, as a government entity, gets a better rate in terms of bond financing.
Yes.
That's correct, yes?
That is absolutely correct.
So the city acts as a pass-through on that issue, correct?
Not on the event center. Again, we are not participating in any way in financing the event center. What we are getting out of this is what your committee and what the council really stressed from the beginning was an improved and redesigned convention center, a larger convention center, one with more meeting space, one with contiguous exhibit space that would make it much more competitive. We will go from being number 15 to being within the top 5 convention centers. Now, in terms of financing our new hall, our convention center, more than 75% of the funding to finance that is coming from private sources. Those are basically the market rate ground leases for the parking, the market rate ground lease for the event center. Again, no break on those. The market rate appraisal on the signage, which is being converted to a Mello-Roos tax on LA Life property, and those bonds will be issued to build the convention center. And then the city will be issuing for its convention center lease revenue bonds. But the only money backing those are the property taxes coming from the event center, which we don't get now because it's public property, and the parking taxes from event center attendees.
So these are net new tax revenue that will be put back into the project.
That's right. They are all net new tax revenue now. So the city is
And
receiving...
net new means that if it doesn't get built, there won't be any net new. Is that correct?
That's exactly right. Again, property tax and parking tax from event center attendees. Business tax, utility tax, sales tax, spillover on transient occupancy tax, None of that is being used to finance the city's portion of the events, of the convention center. So again, the benefit here is really leveraging private sources to build a revamped convention center, which is the ultimate goal. Now, it's terrific. The notion of getting an NFL team is terrific. We all welcome it. We all want it back. But that was never your primary objective. Your primary objective was to use that as a means to achieve what we need to achieve with the convention center. We also discussed the guarantee structures that are in place. The city's general fund is fully protected. And we reiterate the negotiating principles, which after discussion there ended up being about 15. You established 12, and then throughout the discussion there were 3 that were added, so those are addressed in the report. So again, what's before you and what would be approved initially, again, at your next meeting and executed, is the implementation agreement, which is the guiding document that brings all of the information together.
Okay, quick question. So basically, in sum, the transaction documents reflect that there are no public subsidies to be used in the stadium. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Just also let the record reflect that Mr. Huizar has joined us. The next question I have, that the report says that the city may pay as much as $13.8 million towards the total bond amount for the construction of the new hall or the convention center. And maybe Mr. Santana is better explaining that. I'm not sure which person is better, but I'd like an answer to that. And then the companion question to that is, the staff report said that the initial costs for the new hall were underestimated, but that this proposed agreement does not result in additional risk to the city, and if you could explain how those risks were mitigated.
Madam Chair, before he answers, I'd like to ask one question that goes along the line of questioning and statements we're making regarding our reports. On our desk, we have 2 voluminous reports, the huge files here. We just received them, and for the public record, I want it to be known that we just received them, but we are not acting on any of these actions today as information. We are basically going over, as been stated, the material that we've already received through these hearings. But this basically documents that verbiage and the presentation of what we've already heard. And between now and the next meeting, we'll have the time to dig into these reports, pull out questions and issues after this presentation. For the record, is that accurate?
That is accurate, and I might point out that attachment B to the report actually takes the original MOU and points you to the documents that implement those provisions in the MOU. So it's a good cross-reference for ensuring or reiterating the fact that what we're doing is implementing the terms of the MOU that you debated and approved a year ago.
Yeah, and I'm responding to criticisms that I've already been, it's come my way, that's saying you're getting all these reports, you're not even reading them. And the fact is, we are reviewing them, we're going through this very diligent process, and yes, we did receive them, I guess, a few days ago.
Yes.
But we will get through these different documents, given the amount of time we have between now and the next meeting. So I want to put that on the record.
Okay, thank you. So we go back to the $13.8 million towards the total bond amount for the construction of the new hall, and then the mitigation of risk in that the initial cost for construction was underestimated or purportedly underestimated, and that this proposed agreement does not result in additional risk to the city.
Good morning. We issued last night, in part in response to some of your preliminary questions, a supplemental report that is much thinner, that essentially tries to summarize the financial structure of this proposal in more straightforward language. There is no change in the actual content in terms of the numbers that are presented in the larger report. Our attempt here was to make it much more clear and understandable, and certainly respond to any questions you have. Let me start off by saying that timing is everything. When you originally approved the MOU, interest rates were at a particular level. Interest rates have continued to drop and now are at historic lows. As a result of that, it gives the city an opportunity to essentially build a more effective convention center that had originally been contemplated. And so as part of the process that the committee has, that our group has been working with A&G, we try to identify opportunities to strengthen the convention center as comparison to what it is today. One of the major changes is the addition of a ballroom that currently the convention does not have. What's being proposed would be the largest ballroom in the city, allowing for major events, fundraisers, and different kinds of activities to take place at the convention center.
What would the capacity be?
Philip, do you know this?
Approximately 3,000 to 4,000 people,
And at this point, our largest ballroom, it has a capacity of,
probably around 1,500.
and would that be, what, the JW Marriott?
I would say 1,500 over there to 2,000 JW Marriott across the street. This would be about double their capacity.
Be perfect for a quinceañera.
Yeah. Multiple at the same time. In addition to that, we're providing better linkages between the convention center and Gillingsy Plaza, creating a way that people could travel in and out, linkages that currently do not exist, and provide exterior space, taking advantage of the weather that we have, as well allowing people to go into Gillingsy Plaza in a more effective manner. We're enhancing the security features. Obviously, as we build a new convention center, there will be new security features there. We want to make sure that we enhance the security features that exist within the older section so that it's one centralized system. In addition to that, there has been some increases in costs as the architects and engineers have begun to go from what was simply a concept to something much more specific. And so the city, if interest rates were to remain the same today, okay, when we go out to issuance in the spring of next year, we would be able to capture the new cost of the convention center, which is approximately $314.6 million. If you recall, the original estimate, and again, it was only an estimate, was 280. So there has been an increase in the cost, some of it because we're taking advantage of the low interest rates to be able to make a much more effective convention center, actually include enhancements that do not include today. Some of it as a result of just now that we've had the opportunity to go be more specific on what it will look like and be designed. So combined, that does add an additional cost. But again, if interest rates stay today at the same levels, then that should be enough to cover the costs, plus the cost of capitalized interest, which is necessary for the first 3 years, as well as the cost of issuance.
Let me ask you this question. So what is driving this, from the perspective of the city? Is it that the interest rate continues to fall and that the city sees an opportunity to pull in additional amenities that we hadn't previously contemplated to make it a more, vigorous project? Because we think that lower interest rates will balance out increased cost and increased construction costs. Is that what the thinking is?
What the process is to ensure that the obligation that AEG has is to ensure that the city has the equivalent efficiencies and the equivalent use that we currently have, and that commitment has been made. As this process moved forward, the team before you sought out opportunities to provide additional enhancements due to this enormous capital investment to make the convention center more effective. We're fortunate in that the interest rates that exist today allow us to capture those costs without adding additional debt service to the city. And so that provides the opportunity.
And I would add one thing to that. The bond capacity has gone up also because, again, in the final analysis, when the final signage plan was developed, that was revalued. And the original value was $5 million. The revalue is $6 million. So what's happening with that additional $1 million is that's being added to the Melrose that's backed by the LA Live property. So the amount of bonds from that source has gone up, and that also increases the bonding capacity. And again, in discussing these, and Phil can certainly get into this as well, I wouldn't characterize these improvements as, nice to have and value engineering, we can get rid of them. In looking at the programming of the center, these are important elements that will make us competitive and make the center work
Yeah.
better. So it's just a matter of whether or not there's sufficient funding to pay
And
for it.
I don't dispute that. All I'm trying to do is to back into
Right.
how this is paid for and what stream of, net new revenue would cover this cost. And is there some understanding, I don't think we've negotiated this yet, who will absorb this additional
Well,
cost?
if I could get into that.
Yeah,
So
please.
under the best case scenario, assuming that interest rates stay low, this additional cost will be covered under the existing structure that has been contemplated. Now, it's our responsibility to also provide you the worst case scenario, not just the
Please
best
do.
case scenario.
Please do.
And
Please
so
do.
that you have full disclosure as to, something may happen to the economy, interest rates may actually go up. And so what we assumed was what would happen if interest rates went up by 100 basis points or by 1%. And so under that, and I'm using this kind of chart here as part of the, in that case, the city, obviously the total price tag, it's the final page of the last communication we sent. The total price tag for the convention center still remains the same at $314. The city would be able to borrow under the structure of the deal for the convention center, $287 million under the lease revenue bonds and the Mello-Roos bonds as contemplated. We would still be obligated to do the capitalized interest, which would cost us slightly more at $51 million, almost 52, and the cost of issuance stays relatively the same. And so under that scenario, there is a shortfall, okay? And that shortfall is characterized by $27 million. And so at that point in time, and again, we won't know this until we actually issue the debt, because at that point, we will be able to capture whatever interest rate exists at that time. The city, given the fact that some of the reasons for the cost increase are as a result of added features that the team feels are very important to make us more competitive for citywide conventions.
So what's the backup plan should the interest rates
So
go
the-
up and that the $27 million shortfall manifests?
So it's our belief that about half of that are really as a result of features that we've added to the convention center. The other half are frankly as a result of, as we're improving, as we've started getting more specific on what it looks like, it is part of AG's responsibility to deliver to the city a convention center that has the same functional equivalency in use that we currently have. So
And what's their perspective on that?
they have concurred that they are responsible for their half. And so the city you would have then a couple of options at that point for the 13.8. Number one, you could look at the scope and say, you know what, maybe we can narrow it down further. We would do, our initial intent would do what we normally do is some value engineering to determine if we could reduce our portion of that responsibility. We could look at, and then ultimately you would make that decision. Or we could look at other savings that are generated as a result of this deal. For example, part of the responsibility AG has is to defease some of the debt on the current convention center because of private use issues. And then that would allow us to see if there's any additional borrowing capacity to be able to cover that $13 million. The $13 million in the context of this project is fairly minor, and so we would then come back to you with a variety of options to consider how to manage the city's portion of that additional cost. Again, this is the worst case scenario. The most likely scenario is probably somewhere in between, and obviously none of us are fortune tellers. We can't say what interest rates would be, and at that point, that number will be less than the 13.8 million. And so we think that because interest rates are low, our financial advisors believe they'll continue to stay low by the time we issue the actual bonds, that it makes sense to proceed forward with fairly reasonable expectation that we'll be able to manage the full cost under the existing structure. And at the time that we issue the debt, should there be any change, we would come back to you and you would have options to consider at that time.
Okay, and I thank you very much for that. I think after today, I'd like to sit down with you and Mr. Miller to craft a companion motion to go along with the 12 guiding principles, and something along the lines of, in the event that the interest rate goes up, what our default position is, or our plan B, and what thresholds we need to meet as a city to make sure that, again, the taxpayer interests are protected. And I'd like to see some language that memorializes the understanding of AEG's participation should the worst-case scenario occur on this. Although I am clear, and I appreciate your clarification, that the enhancements were requested and recommended on our side of the equation, on the city side.
And if I could, just one clarification for the public. When Miguel was referring to defeasance, what that means is when bonds are defeased, our debt service goes down because they're no longer an obligation. That portion is no longer an obligation. Those savings have not been programmed in anywhere. So this contingency, in essence, the idea would be that it would recognize savings that we haven't recognized yet in this deal, in our debt service going down because some of the bonds have to be defeased. That's what defeasing means.
There are bonds associated with this project.
No, with the current convention, we pay approximately $50 million for the current convention center. So we're going to buy down some of that down. It's AEG's responsibility to pay for that. And so that will result in savings for the city on an ongoing basis because the amount of debt that we have would be reduced. It's sort of like buying down a portion of your mortgage. And so your monthly payment then goes down accordingly.
Do you have any other questions? Okay, Mr. Reyes doesn't have any other questions. Mr. Huizar, did you have any other questions?
No, so the unforeseeable items which we may push us to Plan B would be higher interest rates. You said construction costs could increase as well, right?
That's correct. We still don't have part of the process. AEG would actually issue an RFP and select a construction firm. There could also be the other way. There could also be additional savings that come out, and
there could be savings. And what was the third thing you said that may push us to Plan B?
Well, the other would be, would be in the situation, then the city, you would have the option to look at the scope itself and make changes to that scope to reduce whatever.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other comments from panel staff? No? If you would you guys can stay there just if you feel like it. David Pettit, why don't you come forward?
Thank you very much. Good morning, David Pettit from NRDC, Natural Resources Defense Council. We support this project. We've supported it from day one. I'm just here to offer a cautionary word. We were able to resolve our differences with AEG through the mediation process that was in SB 292. We had some issues about how they were going to implement some of the promises there. We worked those out. One thing that was not worked out in the mediation was the differences that AEG has with the Legal Aid Foundation and their client, LA Community Action Network. That has resulted in litigation. There's already litigation that LAFLA has filed. It's on the litigation speed-up part of SB 292. In my view, if that litigation is successful, which it could be, that could take down this entire project. It could kill the entire project. So I'm here to encourage you to work with AEG and encourage them to get back to the table, if they can, with LAFLA and with LACAN. And let's
For the purposes of the public, why don't you tell the public what LAFLA stands for?
Legal Aid Foundation of Los Angeles, a companion organization to the Better organization that you and I used to work for a long time ago. But they are very good lawyers, and they have good outside counsel on this case. I think the case isn't well taken, but I've been wrong before in court, and I'd like to see these housing issues and the affordable housing issues that LAFLA has resolved to protect what the investment we've all put into in having the stadium be a success. Thank
And
you.
what body conducted the mediation?
The mediation was conducted through the Pepperdine Law School. They have a mediation center there. So we used that, and then after that, we at NRDC got together with some of the AEG folks, without them, frankly, and we closed the deal.
Great. Thank you for your input and your participation.
Thank you.
There are no other cards on this item, and we will not be voting on this today. So if there, Mr. Reyes.
I'm a little startled by what I just heard. I mean, that's a significant statement. As a city team, a posture, I know that it's a very delicate situation, but are we informed or do we know what the nature of the differences are between the two parties that were just identified? Are we aware of those dynamics?
In broad terms, yes. I think it largely does get down to an affordable housing issue. I think it's important to note that this project is not displacing any housing. And again, the community benefits packages will be before you on the 24th. AEG is here if they would like to address their discussions any further. So.
I would like to invite them if they feel comfortable doing it. I just think this body should be aware of, given the investment we're putting into this whole process and the amount of time we put into this, what I've just heard is pretty startling. So,
Let me just ask one question. Is there a city attorney here?
Yes.
Okay, because I think we need an opinion. I appreciate what you're asking, Mr. Reyes, and I think it's fine. I just need to get an opinion from the city attorney on whether we can discuss an item that's not part of the description of item 2. Is there?
Well, I have that concern, but I also have the concern that, and I participated in the mediation, is that we all
Are you
agreed.
a city attorney?
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah,
why don't
Tim
you
McWilliams.
identify
Tim
yourself?
McWilliams, Deputy City Attorney, and we all did agree to confidentiality clause in those sessions. So I don't think we want to discuss the particulars of the
I don't want to discuss particulars either. I just want to know, in general, if we are aware of these dynamics. And I've heard a very general answer, which is yes. And I just welcome AEG to give us their insight as to yes or no, or I mean, just whatever they feel comfortable saying. But this is an important statement. When I'm being told that because of this other lawsuit, this deal could go away, I mean, that's a lot of jobs. There's a lot at stake here. And I don't think, I can't take this lightly, so I just want to understand the seriousness of whatever's comfortable for you to say on the record.
Sure. Ted Feckray, Chief Legal and Development Officer for AEG. We certainly have made a concerted effort for several months to work with a wide variety of groups who expressed concerns and issues around the environmental impact report. There were many comment letters submitted. In addition to the mediation that Mr. Pettit referred to, we engaged in mediation with a number of parties, and actually many of those mediations resulted in successful agreements and settlements that we feel very good about. We are obviously very aware of the continued concerns that LA CAN and Legal Aid have on this project. We've engaged not only in the formal mediation that Mr. Pettit referred to, but there have been other informal discussions with them. We're aware of the lawsuit that was filed last week, which, to be clear, is actually not filed directly against this project. The lawsuit that was filed is a challenge against SB 292 and questioning the constitutionality of it. With respect to that, we're very confident, and we believe the State Attorney General shares this view that SB 292 is constitutional, and we think ultimately if we have to litigate that, we're confident that it will be a positive result. But we appreciate Mr. Pettit's point that there is certainly risk around that. So we continue to be motivated to see if there's a potential resolution. And in fact, we have very recently had discussions and talked with LA CAN and Legal Aid about re-engaging to see if there's an opportunity to settle the matter. Our view is if there is a willingness on both sides and there's a reasonable approach, that there still may possibly be a settlement that could be struck there. But it is possible that if we can't settle this, that there may be litigation. That's precisely what the protections of SB 292 were intended to protect against, which is to lay out a process and a time frame to resolve that. So goes back to the question about the timing of this process and the importance of getting our approvals in a relatively short order here, because there's a possibility there could be about a 6-month litigation timeframe, which would allow us to resolve all of that in advance of the NFL relocation window opening up next year. So in sum, I would say we appreciate the concerns that Mr. Pettit expressed. We share them, but perhaps to a different degree, because we have a fairly strong view about the merits of the legality of SB 292, and ultimately if our EIR is challenged, we feel confident that we could defend it. But that said, we would certainly prefer to avoid litigation, and we'll continue to see if there's opportunities to do that.
Thank you, appreciate that insight.
And Mr. City Attorney, would you please advise me as to whether or not I can, the question I would like to ask is the following. How do, the issue that's been raised is the potential for loss of housing. The stadium and the convention center expansion itself do not include the loss of housing at this point. So I'm not clear as to the direction this assertion goes. Because to my knowledge, I'm not aware of any plans to take down housing in the immediate future, in that we also have a requirement in the city, if you take down housing, you have to replace it. So I don't understand the genesis of this.
My suggestion, Madam Chair, would be that planning staff would be best positioned to, in my view, respond to whether or not, and I think your question is perhaps whether or not the environmental analysis is required to take into account housing loss, and has there been any housing loss caused by the project, and what does the environmental impact report say about that? And so I think planning is probably best positioned to.
But I guess I'm asking a factual question, because as the project is currently contemplated, there is no housing loss. So I feel like a dog chasing my tail in some ways, because we're talking about something that's not at issue at this point. And so I'm trying to understand where it may be at issue in the future, factually speaking, because I don't have that fact at this point. It's not a matter of fact, or it's not a fact that's on a record anywhere that I can examine.
Well, my understanding is that the nature of the comments made by these commenters and these potential challengers are that the project does cause a loss of housing. I think if we were to ask the drafters of the EIR, the planning department, they would have a different view of that and agree with your statement, but I think that's probably not before us today.
Well, okay, yeah, and I think it's not before, but again, for me, I'm wrestling with facts as they are, as we examine them right now. Now, you know what? That's my problem. I'll figure it out. Thank you. Any other questions, comments?
No, Madam Chair, not on this item, but before we close the meeting, if it's okay with you, I would like to be considered a yes on item number 1, so that that item could have met quorum. And
If we can let the record reflect that. No other questions, comments? Mr. Reyes?
I have one more question. In light of the different elements of the community benefit package and the nature of its reaches, distances as it comes to improvements, that discussion will occur at the next meeting?
Yes.
Okay.
Right. Mr. Wickham, did you want to add something? Oh, okay.
You do have a meeting agendized for tomorrow as well, in case this meeting went long. Would you still like to hold the meeting tomorrow morning for the ad hoc committee?
I don't think that's necessary, unless somebody has a really compelling...
Okay, I would not recommend that at this point.
Yeah,
So we'll work with the clerk to issue a cancellation for that meeting.
great, thank you. All right, that marks the end of item number 2. This is the time period for any items on the agenda, not on the agenda, this is public comment. You can come forward and speak on those items. Otherwise, the meeting is adjourned. Thank you very much.
Very good. Thank you, Tim.
It's like fact finding. It's like, finder of facts. You gotta, they always say it on every project I've ever built.
I wish. But until next year.
We'll have to meet on the 17th. We are going to meet on
Yeah,
the 4th.
well,
24th.
That'll be in...
They'll figure it out.
No, it's over here.
Just a plain chicken.
I'll be
Right.
from the location.
So,